My name is Janice. I'm currently 57 years old. I divorced my husband early on and have since been working multiple jobs while raising my son, William, by myself. William grew up without his father around, which brought various challenges, but I'm truly happy to see him grown up into a fine man. He's doing well in his job, got married a few years ago, and soon after, had a son. He's my first grandchild. Gabriel, my 3-year-old grandson, is a bit mischievous but a kind child, and I adore him to bits. At William's suggestion, I moved in with my son and his wife after they got married. Now, the 4 of us live together including Gabriel. Since moving in, I quit my previous jobs and now work part-time at a local supermarket. My daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, quit her job during her pregnancy and has been working part-time as an administrative assistant after giving birth. Elizabeth takes Gabriel to daycare and goes to work, and she mostly takes care of the cooking when she gets home early. She's a bit headstrong, but our relationship is good, and I had thought I was set for a happy retirement in the early days of living together. However, I've recently started feeling uneasy about Elizabeth. Specifically, a couple of months after Gabriel started going to daycare, I began noticing signs. Elizabeth still does the basic housework like she did when they first got married. But lately, it seems like she's been leaving the house more often than before. At first, I thought I might be overthinking it.
Mother-in-law, I'm going out for a bit. Please take care of Gabriel.
Again? Haven't you been leaving the house a lot recently?
I have my social obligations, you know. And I need a break from being home all the time.
Whenever I asked her, Elizabeth would dismiss me and head out, regardless of whether it was night or the weekend. Her makeup was done perfectly, as if she wanted to show off a flawless version of herself. And her clothes were flashy and revealing, more so than when she goes out with family. It's not that I'm against dressing up. Elizabeth has always liked to dress up, and I'm sure she's meeting with friends who share her taste. I've tried to convince myself of that, but Elizabeth's behavior of neglecting Gabriel on weekends and leaving the house bothered me. She would come home late at night, sometimes after midnight. By the time she returned, Gabriel would have been long asleep, dreaming. So, it's natural that I began to feel distrustful. With Elizabeth being away, I've been the one looking after Gabriel. Thankfully, this has made him grow quite attached to me. Gabriel seems to notice his mother's absence and sometimes looks at me sadly, wanting to play with her.
Hey, is Mommy not here again?
Yeah, let's play with Grandma until Mommy comes back. Daddy will be home soon, too.
Okay.
Watching my grandson's downcast look makes me feel heartbroken. I've thought about having a serious talk with William about Elizabeth. He must have his own suspicions about his wife's nightly outings. Lately, from what I've seen, there doesn't seem to be much conversation between them. But with William coming home exhausted from work every day, I hesitate to bring it up. I knew something had to change, especially for Gabriel's sake, but my frustration with Elizabeth only grew as the days passed. Then came a Sunday, which happened to be my birthday.
Grandma, happy birthday.
Gabriel, smiling broadly, handed me a small envelope with both hands. Oh my, what's this? Eager for me to see inside, Gabriel's smile widened. I took the light blue, cute envelope and pulled out its contents. Inside was a piece of paper, folded in 4. As I unfolded it, another piece of paper seemed to have been tucked inside and fell to the floor. Oh. Curious about what it was, I picked it up, but first, I looked at the folded paper. It had a drawing. A sweet image of Gabriel and his mother, Elizabeth, smiling and holding hands together. I felt a slight discomfort at the sight, but dismissed it as nothing at the time. Gabriel can't write yet. Instead, he drew a picture as a present for me. I've seen Elizabeth and Gabriel drawing together with crayons and colored pencils before. At my age, big birthday celebrations aren't a thing, but a gift from my dear grandson meant a lot to me. Thank you, Gabriel. My thanks made my adorable grandson beam with pride.
Gabriel, Mommy says it's almost time to go out.
William, who was at home for the weekend, peeked his head from the hallway.
Okay.
Gabriel responded cheerily. He was about to go shopping with Elizabeth. Gabriel left the living room with light steps, and William came over to me. I showed William the drawing I had just received. He smiled happily, as if it were his own birthday.
Mom, happy birthday.
William, always the gentle soul, wished me in a slightly embarrassed tone. Gabriel's kindness must have been inherited from him. Proud to have such a son, I felt a swell of pride. Then I remembered the white letter I had dropped and not yet opened. It seemed to be more than just a drawing. As I began to open it, my heart felt uneasy for some reason. Despite it being a gift from my beloved grandson, I had a bad feeling. It was a letter, in Elizabeth's handwriting. Wondering why I would receive a letter from Elizabeth, I started reading. What? The name at the beginning made me exclaim out loud.
What's wrong?
William asked, curious, but I was too shaken to reply. By the time I finished reading the letter, my hands were trembling. What is this? Raising my voice, I looked again at the drawing Gabriel had made. A scene of Gabriel and Elizabeth smiling happily together, with Gabriel holding a toy in his hand that we don't have in our house. And the background of the drawing. It was a window with blue curtains. Such colored curtains are nowhere to be found in our house. I was certain. This drawing was not set in our home, but in another man's. And that man was the one named in Elizabeth's letter. Brian, a daycare worker where Gabriel goes, came to mind. Naturally, Brian knows Gabriel. It seems Gabriel had accidentally included Elizabeth's letter with the drawing in the envelope. No, perhaps Elizabeth intended to give this drawing to Brian herself. After reading the content of the letter, there was no other conclusion to draw. Elizabeth must not know that the drawing and the letter ended up with me. I didn't want to see or remember the content of the letter ever again, but I looked down at the damning paper once more.
To Brian, this drawing was made by Gabriel for you. He says he wants to live with you soon. He loves you very much and wants us three to live together as soon as I leave my current husband.
I couldn't read any further without feeling nauseous. My anger peaked, and I tore up the seemingly sweet drawing made by my precious grandson.
Mom! That was a drawing Gabriel made for you. How could you do that? Think about your grandson's feelings.
William was visibly angry at my sudden action. Breathing heavily, I glared back at my son. For me? Don't joke. Can you say the same after seeing this? I thrust the letter in front of a puzzled William. As William began to read the letter, his lips started to quiver. His face turned pale, then quickly filled with indignation. He was more furious than when he had been angry at me. I had never seen my son explode with so much emotion.
This is cheating. Just like Dad.
In William's mind, not only Elizabeth but also the image of his father, my ex-husband, must be looming. My divorce was due to my husband's infidelity. William was in upper elementary school then, so he would have understood what cheating and divorce meant. The thought of him going through the same injustice again was unbearable. I'm definitely going to get back at Elizabeth. I couldn't forgive Elizabeth for making my son sad and betraying my grandson. Thus, we vowed to get back at Elizabeth while our anger still boiled. Elizabeth, after returning from shopping, left again in a hurry, leaving Gabriel behind. The torn-up drawing was already in the trash, but I decided to ask Gabriel to draw a similar one again. Also, as discussed with William, I added a note to Elizabeth's letter. Mimicking Elizabeth's handwriting was a tedious task, but we managed to finish tampering with the letter. We invited Brian to Gabriel's birthday party happening a week later.
I really want you to come, and I'll explain our situation to my husband and mother-in-law then.
While adding this to the letter, my face must have grimaced from discomfort countless times. Unaware of anything, Elizabeth handed the tampered letter and redrawn picture by Gabriel to Brian the next day. Elizabeth returned home in a great mood after giving the gift to her lover, and William suggested we throw a big birthday party for Gabriel. Naturally, Elizabeth, who loves a grand celebration, agreed without any suspicion.
Then we'll have to invite lots of Gabriel's friends.
Elizabeth eagerly invited a large number of people from the daycare, humming happily as if nothing was wrong.
Are we not inviting the daycare teachers?
Well, it's a bit much to ask them to come on their day off.
When William pressed, Elizabeth could only give a vague reply, as if hiding her guilty conscience. I shrugged my shoulders subtly, thinking she surely wouldn't want to invite him. Even as Gabriel's birthday approached, Elizabeth continued to leave his care to me and go out all dressed up. Both William and I were growing more irritated by the day, but we knew everything would be settled soon. That thought alone got us through the days until the Saturday before the birthday party. Seizing the moment while Elizabeth was out, I asked Gabriel to draw another new picture. Mommy's friend that she often goes to see, you know who I'm talking about, right, Gabriel?
A friend. Oh, yeah. I know.
That's right. Let's draw a picture of that friend and give it to Mommy as a present. She'll be so surprised.
Okay. I'll surprise Mommy.
Gabriel smiled happily and picked up his crayons. William, who had been watching TV nearby, looked back at us, peering over. I gave him a small nod in return. Days before, I had sneaked a peek at Elizabeth's smartphone while she was in the bath and obtained undeniable evidence of her affair. The screen lock was on, but it was easy to guess the 4-digit code. For someone having an affair, you'd think she'd change her password from her birthday to something less obvious. Luckily for us, that made things easier. Now, everything was in place. The morning of Gabriel's birthday party on Sunday was hectic from the start. Elizabeth stayed at home for once, dolled up as if she were the star of the show, and greeted each arriving friend with a grand entrance. Once everyone had arrived, the daycare kids sang happy birthday. Gabriel sat in front of a birthday cake larger than his face, blowing out the candles corresponding to his age, to a round of applause. Elizabeth, oblivious to what was about to unfold, was in a visibly great mood. Right when the applause died down, the doorbell rang.
Now who could that be?
Elizabeth sounded annoyed, as if this interrupted the mood. She probably thought it strange since all the moms she had invited were already in the living room. I'll get it, I told Elizabeth, and headed for the door. I opened it, greeting the visitor with a plastered smile. Laughter from the mothers and children echoed behind me. After a brief greeting, I led the man who had come to disrupt the cheerful atmosphere back into the living room. Elizabeth, you have a visitor. Everyone, including Elizabeth, turned around in unison. The room fell silent, and it wasn't Elizabeth, but one of the moms who let out a surprised gasp. The person herself was frozen, her mouth agape in shock.
Brian, why are you here?
Snapped out of it by the mom's question, Elizabeth pushed past me to the man standing by the door.
What are you doing here?
What do you mean? Didn't you invite me, Elizabeth?
I didn't invite you. What's going on?
As the two of them started arguing amid the murmurs of the crowd, I looked at William, who was next to Gabriel, and nodded slightly. Then I called Gabriel over. Gabriel, you have a present for Brian, right? Since Mommy's here, why don't you give it to both of them?
Yeah.
Gabriel stood up, beaming, and walked over to Elizabeth and Brian, handing over the piece of paper he was holding. In front of Gabriel's innocent smile, Brian looked confused, but before he could take it, Elizabeth snatched the paper away. The moment they saw the drawing, both of them froze.
What's going on, eh? What's this drawing?
The moms crowded around the two, pressing Elizabeth with questions once they understood what the drawing depicted. I had Gabriel draw a cozy picture of Elizabeth and Brian, holding hands and smiling happily at Brian's house.
I don't know what this is. I've barely spoken to him. Right, Brian?
Under the pressure of Elizabeth's fierce tone, Brian reluctantly explained.
Yeah, we only greet each other when I see Elizabeth at the daycare during drop-off and pick-up times.
No, that's not right. Mom and him are friends.
Gabriel chimed in innocently, tilting his head.
I've played at his house with Mom.
Gabriel, stop it.
Elizabeth covered Gabriel's mouth with both hands to prevent him from speaking further. Brian's face turned pale, losing all its color.
Is that true, Brian?
The mom's disdainful glances turned towards him.
That's not true.
What do you mean it's not true? Enough is enough.
William, who had been silent up to now, finally burst out, stepping forward to confront Elizabeth and Brian, showing them the screen of his smartphone. Among the crowd peeking over, there was a photo of Elizabeth kissing Brian on the cheek, a photo I had sent to William after sneaking a look at Elizabeth's phone. There were several other photos, all evidence of the affair, with traces of the transfer deleted. Additionally, there was a photo of the letter Elizabeth had written to Brian. A hideous letter, taken by William as evidence before I tampered with it, expressing Elizabeth's desire to leave her husband and live with Brian and Gabriel.
How about that? Can you still talk your way out of this?
Elizabeth, you wanted to leave William to be with him, didn't you? All those times you were out, you were with him, leaving Gabriel looking lonely, cheating on your husband with another man. I recounted in front of everyone how Elizabeth had neglected Gabriel. Anger surpassed disgust among the friends present, in response to the images William showed and my words. Elizabeth, shaking with frustration, turned her head away to escape the accusatory stares.
You're the worst. I'm leaving.
One by one, the moms left with their children, their expressions cold. Elizabeth, having lost all credibility, collapsed to her knees on the now silent living room floor. Only the family and the man involved remained when William handed Elizabeth a piece of paper.
My name is already signed. Now it's your turn.
The moment she realized it was a divorce form, all color drained from Elizabeth's face. Struggling to stand, she staggered up.
Wait a minute.
I can't live with you anymore. Go to that guy if you want.
I quietly moved away with Gabriel, covering his ears. I didn't want a child just becoming aware to hear such things. Elizabeth knew the story of my divorce, yet why did she do this? It's too late to reflect on her actions that dredged up William's traumas. Resigned, Elizabeth, though reluctantly, signed the divorce form with trembling hands.
There, I signed it. Are you happy now?
Throwing the paper at William, Elizabeth raised her voice hysterically.
Yes. And about the alimony, I expect you to pay up.
What? I don't work. Where do you think I'll get the money?
You don't work? What about your office job?
That's.
You'll figure it out.
William said bluntly, as if pushing her away. If she wasn't willing to pay, he threatened to take it to court. At that, Elizabeth finally fell silent, likely realizing she had no chance of winning in a legal battle. After discussing with Brian, William made an agreement for him to pay alimony as well. Subsequently, Elizabeth left the house with Brian without saying a word to Gabriel. The next day, William filed the divorce papers at the court. The divorce from Elizabeth was finalized. A few days later, I heard that Brian had quit his job at the daycare. Complaints from the moms had flooded in, and he lost his job due to the loss of trust from his employer. As for Elizabeth, who left for Brian's, her whereabouts after the divorce remained unknown. Rumors suggested that her relationship with Brian didn't last, and though I thought she might come back for Gabriel, she never showed up. Even if she did return, both William and I were firmly against handing our precious grandson over to a woman who would cheat. I decided to continue living with William and Gabriel.
Gabriel has always been closer to you than Elizabeth. Let's continue living together in this house.
Gabriel cried for days after his mother left, but gradually he began to regain his spirits. He seems to understand, even as a child, that his mother won't be coming back for him. I regret that we ended up putting him through the same situation as young William.
I'm not lonely. I have you, Grandma, and Dad.
Gabriel said without shedding a tear. Feeling deeply how much Gabriel adores me, as William said, I couldn't help but hug my grandson tightly. Weeks passed, and Gabriel settled down, showing us his smile again.
Bye, Grandma, I'm off.
Now, I take him to and from daycare. I wave back at Gabriel as he waves at me with all his might. With his mother gone, William and I decided to give him even more love than before and watch over his growth together.
I'm feeling great. Give me the mic.
During my friend's speech, my tipsy mother-in-law snatched the mic from her and spontaneously started her own speech. My father-in-law was plastered, having a blast with the relatives. To top it off, my mother-in-law gave a speech mocking me. What did I ever do to her? Why does it have to be like this? Just when I was about to cry out loud, a single comment from my niece dramatically changed the atmosphere. My name is Lisa. I am 48 years old and I've gained a lot of weight as I often join my husband at all-you-can-eat buffets. And yet, he loses weight easily just by exercising a bit. When he said, "Great, now I can eat more," I was so frustrated that I considered switching his dinner to lard for a week. I love my husband, but right now, I hate his metabolism. I'm determined to slim down and make him fall for me all over again, yet here I am, enjoying another delicious meal. I married Dustin, who is a year younger than me, 5 years ago. We hit it off so well that everything from dating to marriage happened in quick succession, but that's when the real challenge began. When we went to announce our marriage, my mother-in-law objected, saying, "Why marry an older bride who can't even have kids?" My father-in-law also sighed deeply, expressing his disappointment. "I was wishing that you would have a younger bride." My first impression was that they are very rude people. According to my husband, his family home is, to put it mildly, a den of evil. His mother has always been strict with the women he brought home, and a previous girlfriend was even driven away, unable to make it to marriage. My father-in-law is a womanizer, having had numerous affairs, showing no interest in his wife, which has led to a poor marital relationship. His desire for a younger bride was probably a search for some eye candy he couldn't get at home. Despite their strong opposition, my husband suggested we marry without their consent, but I couldn't accept that. I visited my in-laws' home multiple times to get their blessing for our marriage. I love my husband. So, it's only natural for me to want to get along with his family. Besides, I didn't want to marry amidst opposition from his family. Thus, we finally got their blessing to marry, and on the day we registered our marriage, my mother-in-law said something. "You know, I was always tormented by my mother-in-law and it frustrated me. So, I decided that once my son found a wife, I would be the one to torment her." Standing before her, smiling innocently as she spoke, I was taken aback. Essentially, the age difference between me and my husband didn't matter to her at all. She just wanted to torment someone, no matter what. Surely, the previous girlfriends my husband brought home were tormented for no reason as well. So, I decided to keep a healthy distance and have as little interaction with them as possible. But when we started looking for a wedding venue, my mother-in-law interfered. "You should listen to our ideas for the wedding," she said. "It's our wedding, and since my in-laws weren't contributing financially, why should we have to listen?" Needless to say, that's what I thought. However, after talking to some friends who were already married, many said, we were told the same and included our in-laws' ideas. It seems that, after all, they are my husband's parents, and it's only right to respect them to some extent. While I had my reservations, I could understand their point. My husband said, "Just ignore them," but for my in-laws, it's their only son's big day. It wouldn't be right to just disregard them. So, we decided to at least listen to their ideas, even if we didn't ultimately follow them. However, I soon regretted that decision. They complained that the venue we were considering was too expensive and suggested a place run by a friend of my mother-in-law. It was old, and the online reviews mentioned issues like, the event didn't go as planned, and they got our names wrong. Of course, my husband declined it, but then my mother-in-law started saying things like, the bride's dress should be cheap. She suggested I use her old wedding dress to save money. "Don't waste money," she said. As if anyone would want to wear something that's been gathering dust for years. I realized her true motive was simply, I don't want the bride to be the center of attention, and I firmly refused. My mother-in-law had a lot to say to me, and accepting her ideas would have led to an unimaginable type of ceremony. It was a parade of absurd suggestions, so, in the end, we turned down most of her wishes. Looking back, this may have ignited her spiteful spirit. She kept pushing until the last minute, suggesting things like, I want to travel, so get married abroad, or the more threatening, if you don't listen to me, I won't attend. Despite being fed up with her demands, we, as a couple, managed to get through it, and then came the wedding day. My mother-in-law showed up looking like she was dressed for a funeral. Actually, her outfit could only be described as mourning attire. I felt the pressure from her, as if she was saying, I do not approve of this wedding. 2 weeks before, she had exclaimed, I won't be attending your ceremony. Perhaps my response, then, it's fine if you don't attend, had irked her. She didn't even show up in the dressing room, and before I knew it, she had taken a seat among the relatives, making it difficult to ask her to leave given the atmosphere. But to anyone observing, it was clear, the bride and mother-in-law do not get along. My friends and relatives all wore troubled expressions. As the ceremony progressed, the behavior of the groom's relatives started to turn peculiar. They had drunk too much and were completely wasted, and one relative started heckling during the movie made by my husband's friend. Of course, we had the staff escort that relative out. Even my father-in-law was drunk, waving around a bottle of homemade wine like a glow stick. To top it off, he shouted, "Hey, waiter. Another beer, please," as if we were at a bar. Some guests left mid-ceremony, feeling unwell, escorted by the staff. Thanks to the staff's consideration, the ceremony could proceed, but my guests were all appalled. It wasn't a surprise, given the chaotic scene. My husband and I were so embarrassed that we spent most of the ceremony looking down. It was the worst. It was at our wedding party, during my friend's speech as the representative of our friends, the incident happened. Suddenly, my tipsy mother-in-law exclaimed,
I'm feeling great. Give me the mic.
And tried to snatch the microphone from my friend who was in the middle of a speech. Now, the groom's mother will say a few words, she began. My husband and I were dumbfounded by this unexpected turn of events. Even though she was drunk, my mother-in-law's actions were so natural that even the staff were questioning, wait, was this part of the schedule, and went to check the program.
My words are about Lisa. She has been a hard worker all her life.
My mother-in-law started. I was bracing for something odd, but her comment was unexpectedly positive. If it wasn't going to be something bad, I didn't want to create a scene by dragging her off the stage. Maybe it would be best to act as if this speech was planned all along? The staff and my husband asked if they should stop her, but I decided to see how it would unfold.
Lisa lost her father at a young age, and a little later on, her mother passed away too. Her older sister raised her in their parents' home, she continued. That sister also passed away a little while ago due to a chronic illness. My son could never imagine the kind of hardship she has faced. She is a remarkable woman who has gone through a lot.
Listening to my mother-in-law, her speech wasn't bad at all. She talked about how both my parents had passed away, and despite the struggles, with support from my surroundings and my sister, I managed to attend college. It was a heavy topic for such a joyful occasion, but indeed, that's the life I've led, with no lies. She acknowledged my past, and my relatives were moved to tears by her words. I started to think maybe my mother-in-law had a good side after all. But about 30 minutes into her speech, she said,
But don't you think the reason her parents and sister died young, from a chronic illness, is because she's a jinx? I was shocked when I heard this story during the marriage proposal. She must be thinking, look at me, aren't I pitiful? Always seeking attention, that one. Maybe she likes to boast about her struggles, being clueless as she is. She probably doesn't know we have no interest in such stories.
Everyone, not just me, was stunned by my mother-in-law's words, as she laughed it off. I think the shock was so great because everyone was drawn into my past. Only for my mother-in-law to completely turn the tables on me. In the end, all she did was expose my painful past in front of everyone and mock me. I had shared my family situation during the marriage proposal because I couldn't hide the fact that my parents were no longer with us, never with the intention of boasting about my misfortunes. If it were possible, I still wish I could meet with living family members. So, of course, I wasn't bragging about misfortune. Despite knowing it would ruin my bridal makeup, I couldn't help but cry. Then, at that moment, I heard someone laughing. The laughter that echoed loudly across the hushed hall came from Sarah, my niece who's in her sophomore year of high school. My mother-in-law, thinking her speech had been well received, cheerfully said, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But then Sarah stood up and said, No, that's not it.
You're calling Lisa's story a boast about misfortune. But what are you trying to accomplish by droning on about someone else's misfortune? Look at this old lady being a vibe killer.
Who are you calling an old lady? I am the groom's mother. Such a rude young lady.
Seeing my indignant mother-in-law, Sarah snorted with laughter again.
Who's the one lacking common sense? You come to a wedding wearing something that looks like funeral attire and try to make a laughing stock out of the bride. Well, no one's laughing, so you're just making a fool of yourself. Not only do you lack common sense, but you also can't read the room. Aren't you embarrassed to stand there with a mic, talking nonsense? Even a young woman like me can see how embarrassing this situation is. Or is it that with age, you've regressed in a certain area?
With that, Sarah raised her hands in a "what can you do" gesture, shrugging her shoulders, which made my mother-in-law's face turn beet red.
Well, I never. Unbelievable. What's going on here, Lisa? Does your niece not know how to speak to her elders?
Saying this, my mother-in-law glared at me fiercely. With all due respect, I think my niece is right. First off, your speech wasn't scheduled in the program, and if you were going to make a lively contribution, that's one thing. But interrupting my friend's speech for such a dull story? It's displeasing.
Exactly, Mom. I don't know if you wanted to pick on Lisa in front of everyone or what, but can't you see everyone's taken aback? Right now, you're not just picking on her. You're coming off, just as Sarah said, as a boring person with no sense of decorum.
At our words, my mother-in-law's face turned even redder, if that was possible, looking like a boiled octopus.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. What do you think of your elders, of your parents, to embarrass me like this in such a place?
You embarrassed yourself by your actions. You've self-destructed, if you ask me.
My niece interjected without missing a beat. Regardless of my in-laws' side being drunk, my guests started to chuckle.
Right. Since you're an elder, everyone was just holding back from saying what needed to be said, Grandma.
Saying this, my niece suddenly gave an innocent smile, which caught my mother-in-law off guard, deflating her anger.
That dress, it's inside out.
What?
At my niece's remark, the hall was enveloped in laughter. Everyone, chuckling at Sarah's words, seemed to have noticed that my mother-in-law was wearing her dress inside out. Ideally, someone from her family side should have pointed it out. But most of the guests on my husband's side were men who were uninterested in the details of fashion. No one had pointed it out.
Coming to a wedding dress like you're preparing for a funeral, and even wearing it inside out, are you getting ready for the afterlife? Elders are always so well prepared, aren't they? But isn't that a bit too early? People like you live the longest, you know.
At Sarah's words, everyone laughed again, and my mother-in-law, now truly embarrassed, desperately tried to cover her dress with her hands. Seeing this, my father-in-law joked. "What, Mom, you're heading to the afterlife already?" Whilst pointing and laughing at my mother-in-law. My husband and I, and probably all the guests, noticed my mother-in-law's anger. But my father-in-law and no one on the in-laws' side seemed to be aware. "Maybe I should look for a new wife then," my father-in-law continued, laughing. Then, a relative from the in-laws' side suggested, "There's Olivia from the nightclub," and my father-in-law replied, "Oh, yeah, that's right," and they all got very excited, seemingly forgetting about my mother-in-law's presence. "Even for you, this is unbelievable. Do you enjoy embarrassing me like this?" My mother-in-law burst out, and before we knew it, she grabbed a wine bottle from a nearby table and marched toward my father-in-law, bottle in hand, declaring, "I won't forgive you for this." Everyone thought, this is bad, we might end up with the police here. But then Sarah ran up and drenched my in-laws with wine from the table.
Cool off with this. Still planning to cause a scene at someone's wedding? Staff, please escort these people out.
Everyone was stunned by the series of bizarre events, but snapped back to reality at my niece's command, and the staff hurried to restrain my in-laws. When the staff asked, "Should we escort your parents out?" my husband and I smiled and responded, "Please do." Thus, the tumultuous wedding came to a chaotic end. Later, my husband and I, along with my deceased sister's husband, went to my in-laws. My brother-in-law came because Sarah had gotten so involved in the incident, and my sister, who had been like a parent to me, was no longer with us. He was furious that my wedding had been ruined and was determined to make my in-laws pay for the wedding expenses. Initially, my in-laws tried to excuse their behavior by saying they were drunk or that solving this with money isn't right, and were reluctant to pay. When my brother-in-law, a former boxer still brimming with muscles, lightly grabbed my father-in-law by the collar, my father-in-law quickly agreed. "Yes, I'll pay, likely out of fear." That same day, he paid the entire wedding expenses in cash, and at the same time, my husband declared we were cutting ties with them. He said to me, I should have done this sooner, and apologized, but I couldn't blame him. I was at fault too, for letting my guard down for a moment, thinking, that maybe she's going to say something nice during her speech. We decided to overcome this hardship and become a stronger couple. Last year, we heard that my father-in-law became wheelchair-bound last year. And my mother-in-law reached out asking for help with his care, but my husband ignored it. It seems my mother-in-law is also suffering from rheumatism, making her hands somewhat disabled. She must have been desperate to turn to my husband for help, but he said, "They're not my parents anymore." Recently, whilst passing by my in-laws' house, I saw it had been demolished. Perhaps they had moved into a facility. But they likely didn't have the funds for both to enter. Maybe my father-in-law managed to get into a facility, but my mother-in-law might be living around a park. I recall seeing someone from the back who resembled her at a park recently. Well, they're strangers to us now, and it's unlikely we'll ever meet again. Meanwhile, my husband and I continue to live a laid-back life. 2 years later, we used the returned wedding funds, added some of our own money, and held a ceremony in a chapel abroad, followed by a belated honeymoon. It was a redo of our wedding. We didn't invite anyone from my in-laws' side, but my family attended, and it turned into a beautiful ceremony. My niece said she was glad it didn't end with that terrible wedding and gave us a generous wedding gift from her part-time job earnings and a portrait of us. She's attending art school, and it was impressively drawn. I felt guilty for accepting such a large gift, but she said, "More than an aunt, I see you like a real sister, so please accept my gift." How sweet of her. When it's her turn to marry, I plan to give back double, no, triple or quadruple, maybe in the form of furniture. Wearing a dress at my age, 2 years older than before, was quite embarrassing, but my husband said, "You look even more beautiful than before," which made me happy. I did go to a bridal spa, but I've definitely aged and changed. He's such a kind husband. However, after the wedding, we let ourselves go, enjoying buffets, a hobby of my husband's. Now at 48, I've visibly gained weight. My husband jokingly said, "You've gained weight, let's go back to the old you," to which I retort, "Shut up, you're thinning on top, aren't you?" This banter is our way of teasing each other. We aim to continue being a couple that jokes and teases, almost like friends, especially since we married late and want to live a long life together. Yes, it's time to lose some weight. Health is important, after all. Well, I am going for a walk with my husband again today.